My name is Wim van Oorschot. I used to be a professor of sociology at the Tilburg University in the Netherlands, where I worked for about 25 years, and recently I moved to the University of Leuven in Belgium, where I was appointed professor of social policy and social work. It was a great opportunity for me to go to Leuven, but I would only be welcomed on the condition that I would take responsibility for the social work master program they have there. So I only recently learned a little bit more about social work, having worked in comparative social policy for so many years. And it's a very nice field to enter, I can say, and I see lots of links between social policy studies and social work studies. And I hope we have a pleasant 2 days, 3 days here. Okay. Developing the European Data Center for Work and Welfare, where we basically put data from all kinds of institutions together and harmonize them somewhat. We also quite clearly start to feel lack of data, problems in what we are doing in that is the field of the comparative welfare state analysis. The analysis, let's say the comparison of welfare systems in Europe. It's quite a big step from the personal critical reflection to now the systems. We are at a different level now. But these systems, of which social work and social policy are, let's say, instruments, these systems have been developed, as you may know, since end of the 19th century. We refer to Bismarck, we refer to charity system, we refer to mutual societies, all forerunners of the modern welfare state. And this modern welfare state started to get on a really, let's say, visible phase after the Second World War, especially in Western Europe. And it is from that moment on that people started to become interested in are all welfare states basically the same, or do they differ? If so, what do they differ upon? How can we measure that? And this, of course, is the start of an academic, let's say, scientific process, recognizing differences in types first, in order to understand later why we see different types. And the subject of my talk regards, let's say, measuring, analyzing, understanding differences and similarities between welfare states across space. So how can we characterize and check welfare systems relative to the German one, for instance, but also across time? How is the Czech welfare state developing over time? And I want to put a particular focus on a problem that from the data center we noticed. Typical problem is that in this kind of analysis there's a specific source of information which is being underused, used hardly at all. While in my view it is very much telling you something about the quality of the welfare state. And the problem is, this specific source of information is recipiency statistics. That's statistics about how many people in the population receive what kind of benefits under what conditions. But also, if people receive benefits, what are the levels? What are the relative levels? And this sounds quite obvious that that is an indicator of welfare provision quality, but these kind of statistics are not being used. So the question I put forward now for this afternoon is, what is the surplus value of recipiency statistics compared to commonly used indicators? There are indicators used, of course, for comparative welfare state analysis, otherwise there would not be such a field of study. So what are the problems of the commonly used indicators and what is the added value of recipiency statistics? And then this is the more substantive question: what comparative picture do we get of European welfare states on the basis of benefit recipiency statistics? May I ask, who of you has heard about the welfare regime typology of Esping-Andersen? I only see 3 fingers. I ask again, who of you has heard about Esping-Andersen's? Who has never heard about it? You have never heard about it? Are you the only one, or you are the only one who dares to admit? You haven't heard about it either. It will play a specific role, let me put it like this, since the beginning of the 1990s, Esping-Andersen's typology of European welfare regimes or welfare state regimes generally is considered as, let's say, the fundamental insight in what difference there are between types of welfare state. We will see what benefit recipiency tells us in that respect. Now, what kind of questions do we address in comparative welfare state analysis? First of all, is one welfare state different from the other? Is there a difference, a real difference between the Czech welfare state and the German welfare state? But how do you measure difference? Another question, which is quite often concealed, a bit more implicit, is the one welfare state more developed than the other? Are European social model type welfare states more developed than the Australian welfare state or the American welfare state? Now, there's an Australian, John Dixon, I don't know whether you know him. John Dixon? So he made this kind of analysis for lots of systems all over the world. He came to the conclusion that the Australian system is the best system of the world. And then another question is, okay, development, how do you measure that? Because development is still a bit of a neutral category, even more implicit, but quite often you can sense that people are asking this question: is the one welfare state perhaps of better quality than the other? Is there something like a better quality welfare state? And how would you measure it? So these are more or less the more explicit or implicit questions that you can see in studies on comparative welfare state analysis. But the question is then, how do you measure this? Now, I did a critical reflection of the existing literature on this question and came to the conclusion that the theoretical and the conceptual debate on what is called the dependent variable problem, how do you measure the characteristics of a welfare state, that dependent variable problem is hardly debated at all. So there is Esping-Andersen's work, and that's more or less it. But of course, it is very limited, but there is a debate. And the discussion focuses on the meaning and the quality of 2 specific indicators of welfare stateness or welfare state quality. The one is the degree and quality of social expenditure, where the basic idea is if a welfare state spends more on social issues, then it's a better welfare state than when it spends less. Intuitively appealing. But that is, let's say, an indicator based on financial spending. It's not about outcomes or inputs or whatever. And the second one is degree and quality of social rights. And there we say one welfare state is better than the other if it gives more rights to more people in the population, and if the rights given are more extended, higher level than in other cases. For instance, a social rights analysis, or let me give you an example of both with respect to unemployment and the unemployment risk. the social expenditure indicator would say the unemployment benefit system is obviously better than in country B because country A spends much more of its wealth on unemployment benefits. And social rights analysis would look at the unemployment benefits system in country A is much better than in country B because in country A the unemployment benefit is more easily accessible also for people with short working records, for instance, and it pays out longer benefits than in country B. So that is the social rights legislation comparison. Now both are highly problematic, and that is what I'm going to deconstruct, the value that people attach to these indicators. Let's have a look at social expenditures first. Of course, it is intuitively appealing. More spending is better protection. And there is good data availability because this kind of spending data are being produced on an annual basis by the OECD and by Eurostat, by the American government. American government worldwide, OECD plus somewhat countries, and Eurostat for all European countries. And they are doing that for about 30, 35 years already. So for a practical researcher, it's very easy to log into the database, get the statistics, put them in your analysis, and there you go. But they are highly problematic. First of all, does expenditure measure social rights or social needs? So if a country spends more on unemployment benefit than another country, is that because it has a better unemployment protection system? Or is that because it has more unemployed? It's a combination of both. Eh? So you measure social rights, that is the accessibility and the duration of unemployment benefits, and social needs is the degree of unemployment. But this measure combines them two. You do not know what it is. And the other one, does expenditure measure size of social protection or type of social protection? So also, again, with unemployment as the example, you may have a country which just sits and waits until people become unemployed and then pay out the benefit. And then you can have high unemployment benefit spending. But there may be another welfare state which takes a preventive approach to unemployment and employment and invests in training active labor market policies, which prevents that lots of people become unemployed or that people return to the labor market quite soon after becoming unemployed, and end up with low spending on unemployment benefit. So again, the spending in itself does not tell you whether this is quality protection or not. Now, obviously, you cannot compare social spending in terms of Czech crowns directly with spending in terms of German euros. I would say Reichsmark, but that is the fast. So people then express spending within the country as a percentage of the country's wealth, GDP. Lots of people compare welfare states on the spending, social spending, as percentage of GDP. So the country that spends more of its wealth on this kind of social programs has a better welfare state. But the problem is that this measure also depends on the GDP. So what we quite often see is that in some countries the spending as percentage of GDP goes up. In the other countries the spending in terms of GDP goes down. But in the first country that is not the result of an improvement of welfare protection, but a result of lower economic growth, which makes the indicator taking on a higher value. And in the other country, the value declines because wealth increases. So again, what is happening here? Not a change in welfare protection, not a change in the quality of the welfare state, but a change in the economy. Then another problem is that expenditure figures only give you data on the aggregate level, and that means this kind of figures are the result of multiplying the number of people who receive benefits and services by the amount of benefits and services they get. And then you get the total spending, numbers times amounts. And with that you blur the distinction between two very important different components of protection. The first component is coverage, how many people actually do have access. And the second component of welfare provision is, if they have access, what do they get? And we will see that that distinction between access and level, between coverage and generosity, is a rather important difference, which you do not get with these aggregated social expenditures. So this is that argument. And then the other argument is aggregation means that you cannot use these data to find out which specific groups in a society are protected or not. They just tell you the total story. You cannot analyze whether gender has an effect on pregnancy. Are women more profiting from the welfare state or less? Does that differ between types of welfare state? Are the ones more women-friendly, others, etc.? That you cannot do with these. And so lots of interesting questions you cannot answer with these indicators. Now, just to give you an idea, just an example. Here you find, for the period 1980 to 2007, for a range of Western European countries and OECD countries, you find their scores on the indicator total public spending as percentage of GDP. Some countries different, that's nice, the indicator discriminates, but the question is what does it say? And over the time period there seems to be some convergence, but that is not the basic message. My basic message is another problem of these data. It fluctuates quite strongly per country over a period of 5 years. So if you ever are going to take expenditure figures in your analysis, you have to specify very clearly for which years you take your data. Because the rank order between countries this year can be quite different next year. Because there's such strong short-term fluctuation in these figures. And then people would say, yeah, but what we then do is we take the average of the spending of the last 5 years, and then we have some kind of an average degree of welfare state quality. But then you cancel out all variation, and then in the end all countries will be very close to each other. You don't have variation, and you do not understand actually what is happening. So that is mostly not a good strategy. So spending figures for analyzing differences between and developments in welfare states are highly problematic. What about social rights? Now, it's a very it's a method which gives you a very deep insight in all kinds of detailed differences between social protection schemes within countries, over time, between countries, etc. Because you can compare, let's say, in this country, the unemployment benefit asks a person to have been working at least 6 months within the last 2 years before he can qualify for. And in the other country, it's not 6 months, but 4.5 months, and it is not 2 years, but it is 3.5 years. That level of detail, and even much more detailed. That is what you can do with, well, let me put it like this. This is the basic unit of the social rights comparison. So very detailed. The problem is that, I mean, we are academics, we are scientists, but nevertheless, our, let's say, intellectual capacities are rather limited. So we cannot take in all this detailed information at the same time for all these countries and time periods. So what people do is trying to summarize. They try to summarize and try to limit the information, and they try to get the most essential out of it. And how do they do that? Well, they create, for instance, the famous decommodification index of Sociální. So they create indexes. And then they say, okay, in this country we take these benefits. These benefits have these characteristics on this kind of criteria. What are access levels? What are the levels they pay out? What is the duration? What are the conditions? And then we are going to put a figure, a score, to each of these conditions and criteria. And we give a higher score to a benefit that has a longer duration and a shorter benefit. And we give a higher score to a benefit that pays out more money than to a benefit that pays out less. And then in the end, we put all the scores together for a scheme, and then we get a score for the total scheme. Then for the country, we put together, we add up all the scores for all the schemes, and in the end, we have a country score on the index. And that is the Esping-Andersen decommodification index. And then we say this country has a higher score on the index, so that has a better welfare state than the country with a lower score on the index. So you get rankings, or you get typologies, where they say countries that are in the range of these scores, that is a specific type of welfare state, and countries with range in these scores is another identity. There are others, like Esping-Andersen, the Welfare Generosity, Employment Protection Legislation Index, like the OECD. There are many, many others. Now, what is the problem? First of all, there's a, I would say, uncontrollable amount of arbitrariness in the process of indexing. I will show you it. Here you see a table from Scruggs and Allen, who tried to replicate Esping-Andersen's work as closely as possible. So what they did for all these countries, OECD countries, they took a very detailed look at their unemployment benefit schemes, their sickness benefit schemes, their pensions. Within these schemes, access criteria, duration, amounts, conditions, starting to score all these various elements. And then within the unemployment benefit, they have a ranking score in the end of the replacement rate, of the duration, of the qualifying period, the waiting days, the coverage, and then per benefit they added up these kind of figures per country, and per country they added up the scores of the different benefits. Now you can easily imagine that it is very, very difficult to say why and what kind of score you would attach to, for instance, an unemployment benefit that is longer for, let's say, civil servants in one country, while in the other country the unemployment benefit is longer or shorter for another kind of occupational group. Completely arbitrary. Or how do you weigh up a longer duration against more easy access? Completely arbitrary. So no wonder that Scruggs and Allen came to a very different total index score, decommodification index score, than Esping-Andersen in his original work. Came to a completely different rank ordering of countries. So that is the arbitrariness. And then another problem with social rights is that basically, if you compare social rights, add them up or whatever, you are basically studying the paper reality. And with this fact I was confronted quite, let's say, intensely a few years ago, let's say many years ago, when we did the comparative study of the social protection that was arranged in Dutch collective labor agreements. So this is not legislation, this is agreements between employers and employees, occupational welfare. And there we found, for instance, that the maternity leave, the social protection of young mothers, maternity leave rights were best in the construction sector. And everybody knows that in the construction sector there no women work. There are no women who need maternal leave in the construction sector. Perhaps the old secretary somewhere in the office of it. But, and that just shows, I mean, it was rather easy in the collective labor agreement to agree on this because it had no effect, but it warned me that, hey, there can be a big difference between paper reality and real level and degree of social protection. And if we take that as a principle, then we say this is a rather principled problem of social rights analysis. Okay, that was for deconstruction. Now I'm going to construct. Having heard this story, how now is this new statistic, benefit recipiency, positioned to social rights and social expenditure? And how would the European comparison of countries on the basis of benefit recipiency statistics look like? Now this is a schema which shows you the interrelation between the indicators. Above are the social rights, that is legislation, that is text, that is words. The two components are distinguished, eligibility, which people are covered by, which people have access to, and the other component is entitlement. If they have access, how much do they get for how long, etc. Here we have the population, and what the figure clearly shows is that, let's say, the social rights only are manifested, only are made real when they are applied in a specific population of a country. And then, of course, benefit recipiency results. Some people have access, others not. Those who have access have varying amounts. But the point is here, which kind of risk factors are working in this population. And it is the combination of risk factors and social rights they create benefit recipients. So risk factor could be economic recession leading to unemployment. Unemployment increases the need, the population that needs unemployment benefit. And the question is, to what degree does the legislation actually cover those people who become unemployed? And if so, how much do they get? Demographic factors, same story. If single parenthood increases, then the need for protection increases, and the question is how this combines with social legislation and with the actual social rights of single parents. And then we see here that social spending is the aggregation of the number of benefit recipients and the amounts they get. This is to show that the three indicators each tell their own story. So I'm not saying that from now on we should use only benefit recipiency statistics, but they tell the story in addition to the analysis with the other indicators. Now it is extremely hard to get benefit recipiency statistics from the administrations of countries and to compare them. And you would say, well, benefit recipiency, why is that not used as an indicator? Because in all countries people get benefits, and of course that is registered, and why not just add that up and compare that? And that is because many welfare systems are highly fragmented in many countries. And it's absolutely not so simple for national governments to collect all the administrative data. Then if you put them to Eurostat or to OECD, which countries do in the end, then this country might have called this kind of scheme a disability pension. The other country has called it long-term unemployment. Still another country has another name for it. So putting it together in a meaningful way is also very difficult. So I'm not discussing administration-based statistics. I do that in the paper. You can read that. But I'm focusing now on a second source of benefit recipiency information, and that is in European comparative surveys like the EUSOC, the ECHP, and the Luxembourg income study. People are being asked the question, last year did you receive this benefit? And then they mention about 10 to 12 types of benefits. People can say yes or no, and if they say yes, the next question is, and how much was this? So these surveys have data about recipiency and amounts. I'm using the EUSOC 2003-2008 just to give an illustration. What I have calculated are benefit recipiency rates. For these benefits among the working age population. I could also have done it for the elderly population, the pension, but that is a very different kind of population and need, so I focus now on the working age population. Social assistance, unemployment, sickness, disability, old age, and then old age here basically is pre-pension, early exit, it's before 65, and survivors, mostly widows. And then I calculated how many people in the working age population said to have received one of these benefits in the previous year, and then I added that up into the measurement, the percentage of people among the working age population that has received at least one of these benefits last year. That is my measure. And then the other measure is the relative benefit level. So they also tell you how much they get. And then I have calculated the amount they get as a percentage of the median income in the working age population. And the median income says 50% in the working age population earns less, 50% earns more. My measure says how close people with benefits come to this median. How close are they to an income that is maximum and minimum for the population. I could also have used other standards. Let's say, how much does this benefit bring people above or close to the nationally accepted poverty line, for instance. So you can use different numbers. But I took median income. And then I crossed rates by levels. Now, what kind of picture do we get? XS, you see the percentage of people in the working age population that has received one of the benefits last year. So it gives you an idea of how accessible is social protection in this country. The more people say, I have received a benefit, the higher the access of the system is. That is one dimension of quality. And on the y-axis you see the average amount, or let's say the amount as a percentage of the median income. The higher the score on the y-axis, the higher the average benefit is. The second column dimension, access times levels. Now here you see the countries grouped according to their score on the two dimensions. We also see that in the EU 27, about a quarter of all people now have received any of these benefits last year. And that it is an amount that brings them about 1/3 of the median income of the population. Okay, where's the Czech Republic? Oh, you have it there. Where's the Czech Republic?
Quite close to the cross. Yes.
Close to the cross?
Yes. Above the horizontal line, close to the vertical.
Somewhere here.
To right, above. one of those dots, yeah. Right.
Who has a different opinion? Who's from another country? Yeah, you, Blanca?
We are big cheaters because we've already.
Yeah, you have seen the presentation notes. Well, I'm happy to notice that our clever students enjoy it. So, being a good student is a matter of strategy and tactics, and nothing to do with it. Who is from another country? You are from?
From Slovakia.
Slovakia. Okay. Where's Slovakia? Where would you situate Slovakia?
I'd say more to the left.
More to the left. Less access.
Yes.
And what in terms of levels?
I'd say less.
Less. So more in this quadrant.
But more to the grass. Over there.
That's Slovakia.
Yeah,
Any other countries? You are a specialist in German welfare state.
Yeah. I think Germany would be somewhere in the middle, around the middle. Maybe left, up, somewhere there close to the, yes.
Okay, which countries are these?
Scandinavian.
Why do you say that?
Because they have a huge access, because they are always, the expenditures are, yeah, they are probably the countries which are taking the money, because they have higher tax rates, but they are giving everyone a bit, but not much, so that.
Not much.
Yeah.
Okay, who says I don't agree? Scandinavian welfare, sorry. Yeah.
Well, I would say that in the lower right one, they would be states in UK where they have like a flat benefit, but not high ones. Like
No.
there is not a great amount given to people, but it's mostly for everyone.
So they have flat rate, that means there's a benefit that would say that the amount is relatively low. But still, high access. Is that typical, would you say, for the UK?
Do you have an access to people? Isn't it difficult to get an access to the benefits like this for families and they have some kind of equal rights to get it?
Okay, let's see. There was another.
I have similar. I just didn't agree with that Scandinavian should be the right and down. Like because they have like up and left. If they have rich,
Which country?
Scandinavian.
Scandinavia here.
That,
So one says here Scandinavia, the other says there Scandinavia.
Yes.
Iceland, Denmark, Norway, Finland, Sweden. Iceland is an island out there in the cold, but I will do a trick later on and then it will come closer to its fellow Scandinavia. This is the Netherlands. When I started to give this presentation in the Netherlands, people would situate it everywhere, and then in the end it was. But indeed, we do see that the analysis of the EUSOC data leads to the conclusion that Scandinavian welfare states are characterized by relatively high access and relatively low benefits. Not low in an absolute sense, but low in terms of relative to the median income within the population. So indeed, they pay out a lot of benefit, but small amounts. One of the questions is, of course, why is this, or how is this statistic produced? But that is a discussion on what is actually behind these figures. Greece, Portugal, Spain, Cyprus, and Italy as an exception in the group. These are countries which give few people access to benefits, but if you have access, you get very high benefits. So this is a kind of elite approach. Not everybody is allowed, but if you are then, and this is a kind of universal egalitarian approach, everyone, but not so much. Here we find the blue ones are the continental corporatist welfare states in Espen Jensen's terms. The Netherlands, Germany, Austria, France, Luxembourg and Belgium. They are the exceptions. So some people would say that Belgium is the most northern Latin Rim state. They compare that to Italy for various reasons. But what you see here is the kind of a dimension. You see the dimension. Now the big question is, where are the Central and Eastern European countries? The blank of dots, of course, is quite simple. And these are in red. And here we see Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Latvia, Bulgaria, Slovakia, Slovenia, Czech Republic, and Hungary. And what you see is that they are not scattered, they are not completely grouped, but they are, as the continental European welfare states, in the middle of a dimension going from very elitist inside and outside approach to welfare to a very universal egalitarian approach to welfare state. Now, personally, I would say, do we see here the Bismarckian legacy of the pre-socialist, pre-communist welfare states? There's been a lot of policy learning going on between Germany and Central and Eastern European countries before the Second World War. Now, as you may have noticed, we have said social rights as such, or spending as such, is not so much the issue. The issue is how much is it relative to the size of the social need. It's not spending, but spending per unemployed. And that is called, we have to needs adjust, or needs balance these results. And I took as a measure of social need in a country the percentage of non-employed persons in the working age population. And that is 1 minus the percentage of employed persons. And the idea is the higher the percentage of non-employed persons, the higher the need for social benefits. So we have to correct with that need in order to get a better measure of differences in welfare state quality. So these figures have been divided by the percentage non-employed, and then we get this figure. And then we see that Belgium and Luxembourg go a little bit more there. Iceland is joining its. See what happens? The pattern gets even more. And there's a stronger grouping of countries here. The Netherlands goes there, and there it shows that in terms of social protection, it is rather close to the Scandinavian countries. Okay. This is a dimension going from universalism, egalitarianism, to elitism. And now I may remark that in the standard comparative welfare state literature, the dimension that is always put forward is the dimension from egalitarian universalism to Anglo-Saxon selectivism, not to Latin Rim elitism. So this kind of benefit recipiency data show you a very different perspective on differences between welfare states. Now, interesting it would be if we could include Anglo-Saxon welfare states like Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, and the US in this kind of graphs, and I would be really interested to learn where they would be placed. Okay, this is the first empirical illustration. Are there any questions thus far? Yeah.
I didn't understand what you mean by non-employment rate.
Sorry?
Non-employment, what exactly non-employment is?
Non-employment.
And, yeah, and, yeah, this non-employment rate, I don't understand how it relates to social benefits.
I take non-employment, the percentage of people who are not working, who are not looking for a job,
yeah.
as the percentage of people who might need social protection.
Yes. So you didn't take into account that there are a lot of employed. The countries could differ according to how many employed people simultaneously depend on social
Yes.
benefits.
I can illustrate that with the example of Iceland. Iceland has low access rate. So in Iceland, very few people say, last year I had one of these benefits. Now what does this say? Does this say that Iceland doesn't have the social rights? Or does this say that Iceland does not have people with social needs? Do you follow?
No.
No? Okay, Iceland has few people using benefits. Is that because Iceland has bad benefit system? Or is that because in Iceland few people need a benefit?
Yeah, but my question was probably opposite. I was asking about the situation when people are employed and simultaneously are entitled to social benefits.
Oh, that is
Working
possible.
poverty, for example.
That is possible.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because it's phenomenon in Czech Republic, I think,
Yeah.
increasing. So.
That is possible, this kind of combination.
Yeah.
And then in my measure, they would not be in the non-employed because they are employed.
Yeah.
And you are right that makes a distinction between my two categories of unemployed population and unemployed population is not that sharp. You're completely right.
No, I was trying to question your assumption that employed people are in need of social benefits.
And I agree with you that that is an assumption which is not always justified. I agree with you. But the problem is shown quite clearly by Iceland. If we correct for the non-employed population, which is very small in Iceland, because in Iceland everybody works, very few people need benefits, everybody works. If we correct, then we see indeed that the access to benefits among those who are in need in Iceland is as good as in the other Scandinavian countries. So this means that the initial low access in Iceland is not due to the bad quality of the system, but due to the fact that everybody works and doesn't need the benefit. Any other questions?
Maybe, from today's point of view, you did your analysis for a very special time. I mean, between 2003 and 2008, there was a time of economic growth, and Europe was doing very well, actually, in general. How your picture is changing today after 2009 economic decrease?
I just heard that Leuven University is going to give me 2 PhD students to work out this problem, and they are certainly going to look into it because we have now already EUSOC data for 2010, and 11. And before they finish their PhD, we will have data until 2015. And then the hypothesis would be, two things might start happening. Cutting down on social rights, so decreasing access and decreasing levels. And that would mean that it moves a little bit here. And the other thing is increasing social needs. And that would mean more access, because the need population grows. What is the end result of these two, let's say, powers that go against each other? I don't know. But we should be able to single out the effect of the diminishing of social rights against the effect of the increase in social need. And how do we do that? To needs balance, to divide these figures by the size of social need. For instance, by the size of the unemployment rate. Or where redundant people are put into disability benefit schemes by correcting it for the number of disability persons with disability.
I have one question. In Scandinavia, especially in Sweden, there's this system of creating artificial way of reducing the unemployment rate, whereby instead for the government to pay benefits to the unemployed, it finds a way to employ them for a period of time, say 6 months, and then give them the money. But after the 6 months, they come back to start the cycle all over again. So the question I'm asking is, in a situation like that, do you foresee Sweden moving from the right end of the distance to the left a little bit? Because it's very complicated, where at the end of every 6 months, the new people are unemployed and new people are employed. So the cycle keeps on.
And then the question is, how many people are in this cycle at the same moment? How many people get in, how many people get out? But the point you are hinting at is that the duration. You can easily end up here as a country when you have many people who become unemployed, but for very short periods. And then you end up here. Whereas if you have not so many unemployed, but you give them long-term benefits, excess rates are smaller. And that is one of the other things that we have to analyze further. What is exactly producing these statistics for these countries? What is it exactly? But when I first saw this graph, I thought, wow.
Just a comment, there might be possibly another measure of social need, which would be, for example, the poverty rates before social transfers, which I'm aware has some disadvantages because it's a relative measure, while these non-employment rates are, I would say, more absolute measure of need, but still might be considered to
poverty before transfers.
Yeah.
So good suggestion.
Because even though people are working, in some countries there are huge groups of working poor for many reasons.
It's a good suggestion. Any other questions? Yeah, Blanca.
I would like to ask you if you think to combine your approach, I mean benefit recipiency, with social services accessibility. Because I think that some welfare states stress benefits and some others stress accessibility or access to social services to find solution for some social some situations,
Yeah.
social situations.
Yeah, but then you mean services or benefits for the same type of social risk.
Yeah.
Yeah, like for instance unemployment, you can pay out benefits and or you can give the social service to people, give them an extra education, give them a training program, give them training of having an interview and things like that.
Yes.
And that is services. Well, now we come into the details. These countries are known to be more service heavy than the rest. In their EU SIL questionnaire, this kind of employment related services is included.
Is included?
Yeah. So this is the percentage of people in Scandinavia who say, yes, I have received a benefit last year and or I have received this kind of service last year.
Yeah, thank you.
The question for us for later is to what degree does that really produce these data? And that is why I need 2 PhD students, because every country has a little bit of its own story in the EU SIL. Any other questions? Yeah?
In Luxembourg, we were talking even about the espionage and brainwashing and so on.
Yeah, but some brains here have never heard of espionage.
Even you've mentioned all the problems, or some of the problems connected with that typologies and the commodification index. Okay, but if we look at your picture, you produce with your data, we actually see Scandinavian group, we see the Latin Ring. What we don't see actually is the liberal regime, but this is only what disappears. And you more or less reproduce a big part of espionage.
Yeah, but on a fundamentally different dimension. And only 3 groups.
Yeah.
I mean, the Latin Rim is put into the regime by Ferreira. It was originally not seen by espionage.
Yeah.
Okay. As I said, the liberal welfare states of Ireland and the UK, I have a bit of a problem with saying this is a type which only has 2 representatives, if the representatives of the type are so different from each other. So I do not pay attention very much, and that is why I said I would love to see the other Anglo-Saxon countries in this, and the question is, where would they group? I don't know. Then there was another question.
I want to ask about the quality of standard of life. Because if we compare the low amount of benefits in Sweden, and if we compare it with the higher amount of benefits in Czech Republic, the level of life with the benefits is not same. Like if you count it from if you calculate it from a median of wages, then it doesn't say anything about the level of quality of life or standard of life.
That's true. Are you interested in the level of quality of life? So you would say, I'm from Czechia, but do not be mistaken, I would rather live in Sweden. This is, I mean, these levels are not absolute amounts, they are relative to what happens within the country. And one of the ideas I have to explain why the Central and Eastern European countries are on a higher level in terms of benefit levels compared to Scandinavia is that your median here is much closer to the poverty level, the kind of an absolute poverty level than in Scandinavia. So if you here have 50% of your median, you still have less in terms of consumption power and whatever than when you have a quarter of the median in Scandinavia. But this is actually what I want to measure. I want to measure what is the relative quality of welfare states. So relative within the country, you are doing better than Scandinavia. From the perspective, I am a citizen and I want to be close to the medium, or even more than the medium. Where you want to live, that's a different question. How much time do we have for this?
Well, it was, until now it was 1 hour lecture, but in the meantime you opened floor for questions, so dinner is at 6.
6:15 for the past 6 or
So we still have some, maybe 20 minutes or
A little
something like that.
bit, a little bit. Yeah. I will skip a lot. Oh no, I will not skip a lot. Now, what can you do with these figures? So these figures allow you, that's the other big advantage, to do analysis of benefit recipiency at the individual level. So you can relate all kinds of characteristics of individual people and households to the question, do they receive a benefit or not, and what type of benefit do they receive and how much is it, etc., etc. This is a very simple analysis for all EU countries, EU 27. We see that the excess rate is highest among the population 55 to 64 in the working age population. Very simple. In the EU, benefits among the working age population of whatever type are mostly received by people later in their working career. Simple. But then I did this per group: Scandinavian countries, Western continental countries, Latin Ring countries, and Central and Eastern European countries. You can do this type of analysis. And then I calculated the deviation of the mean within the category. And here we see that in Scandinavia, the age gradient, the difference between the young and the old, is much less than in the other countries. This is a kind of indicator for the egalitarianism in the Scandinavian welfare state. It translates also into a smaller age gradient in recipients. And we see that this gradient is, in this case, highest in Central and Eastern European countries, which says that in the Eastern countries, age is a very strong determining factor of receiving benefits. So this is only basis. Now you can do this for various characteristics like educational level. Again, we see the smallest gradient. We see as a pattern, of course, that people with the lowest education are mostly among the benefit recipients. That's everywhere, but the education gradient again is smallest in the Scandinavian countries. So being old, having a low education, that increases your chances very strictly. But given time, I will not go into this in much detail. But I just want to pay attention to two typical characteristics. Your country of birth, let's say migration, there is a general idea that the European countries are overflooded with migrants who come here trying to get work. Most of them can't, and they get benefits, and they are undermining our welfare system. And here the statistics show you that there is hardly any difference at all in recipiency between people who are local, born in the country, people from other EU countries moving into the country, and people from non-EU countries having moved into the country. There's hardly any difference. Then, of course, you have the question, yeah, but it might be, this is recipiency of 10 different benefits, it might be that there's a difference, the type of benefit that is received. And I will not show you that, but the same kind of story holds for gender or sex. overall, generally, women and men do not have higher or lower chances of benefit recipiency in all European regions and countries. But if we look at the type of benefit, then we start seeing interesting differences. So what we see here is that in the East, Central and Eastern European countries, it is especially women who are highly overrepresented among the recipients of old age related benefit claims, which are pre-pensions. And this is before 65. So in the eastern parts of Europe, having a disability, having an early retirement pension is much the thing that women have. While we see that in the south, this is exactly the other way around. In the south, these benefits are claimed by and reserved for men much more than women. You see all kinds of interesting differences. Again, you see that on the whole, the differences between males and females are smallest, egalitarianism. There we see that women have more unemployment-related benefits than men, have more sickness-related benefits than men. This is exactly the other way around in the south. So with this kind of additional analysis, in the end, for later, we are going to sketch a much more detailed picture of the similarities and differences in benefit recipiency. And through that, to conclude my story, through that, we want to give a more comprehensive picture of the difference in quality of welfare states in Europe. Thank you very much. You wanted to move to Sweden. How long is the time to Sweden?
I think that's because of the lower.
If you stay here, you will be on early pension quite soon.
But I think not in the future, because in the last years it was because of lower age of retirement of women in Czech Republic and Eastern countries, and it will be the same when.
Yes, right. So you said that your data includes the information about social services. So
No. Very partly,
yeah.
for the Scandinavian countries, social services related to unemployment.
But this is a very big question for me. If you speak about quality of welfare state, I think that you should consider the question of quality of social services. For me, it's very important because social services include social work. So, welfare state is also about social services in terms of social work. So, how do you think about it?
I completely agree. And then I've been thinking about that. Is this kind of approach, let's say the recipiency, access, and what you get once you have access, is that a suitable approach for measuring differences in the quality of social services? So how many people in a need population are covered, have access to a specific service, and if they have access to the service, what do they actually get?
Yes, I understand, but then I would speak about something different than about quality of social welfare state. It's not quality of welfare state.
What is it then?
I'm not sure. It's a question for you.
How would I ask you a question?
So it's perhaps something more about what benefits, not about quality of social welfare state.
Okay, then we have a very interesting debate. So we go right back to the beginning. So my story is that until now we use social expenditure, we use social price comparison. I say you should also look at benefit recipiency, and now you are saying that's not enough.
It's more complex.
Yeah. And then I ask you, okay, you write your paper, and the next time you will. I feel very much with you, because this is also difficult. But this is, of course, a very, I mean, this is what I did, this is a philosophical question, I would say, in the end. And that is like saying, in the end, that is not measurable. It is so complex phenomenon, and you can have so many different kind of normative perspectives on the phenomenon, that in the end, I don't think we can agree on what actually quality is. One of the comments was already, I'm not interested in quality if it does not say anything about quality of people's life.
I have one question. What's the difference between your analysis and that of Espen Anderson regarding the type of work that people have to do or people don't have to do to be qualified as unemployed? Because in Sweden, there are some people who are working at the same time get social benefits just because the type of work that they do, it doesn't commensurate the type of life that they live. So, how do you who qualifies to be unemployed in your analysis?
In my analysis, I only look at people who say that they have received an unemployment benefit. I do not have an objective measure of whether they are unemployed or not. For that I can use official unemployment statistics at the aggregate level. But then we all know that there are various kinds of ways of measuring unemployment rates.
So, for example, if somebody works 4 hours a day and does not meet the minimum wage, where at the end of the year the government pays back whatever tax that has paid to the person, that person is not unemployed.
No. But he receives an unemployment benefit.
Yes.
So the distinctions are quite often, I mean, that's with all statistical categories, the distinctions are not always that clear. Yeah?
Do you see something like, I think there is the southern approach, the continental approach, and the Scandinavian approach. Do you see something like the countries are getting more and more similar, that the differences are getting smaller between the southern part and the Scandinavian part? I'm just wondering if, you know, the countries are connected within EU, within all the other organizations, and maybe they will have in the future similar approaches to social benefits and social services. I was just wondering if there is, if you already could see similarities.
Why is that an interesting question? I mean, it's a big question in the comparative welfare state literature, but I do not really understand the interesting thing about it.
Okay.
What would be so interesting to see whether welfare states become more alike?
For political scientists? I mean, for a couple of reasons.
Yeah, I'm asking you what I don't see it.
For me, it's interesting if the union is so much into the country's social policy that they are becoming more and more similar. It's not the thing about the social policy, but about the influence coming from outside to this.
And if the EU had the impact,
yeah,
the differences would become larger. Is that not as interesting, or perhaps even more interesting?
No, more interesting if they are becoming similar, because EU wants to have similar countries. I mean,
what the EU wants, is that interesting?
For me, yes.
Now I'm just, I don't want to push it, but there is of course this convergence-divergence discussion in the literature. and it just fails to interest me. I don't, whatever.
Maybe it's nicer to have more similarity.
Yeah, it's easier, and perhaps we have something developed in our minds through evolution that we rather see equality and coherence and likeness and instead of difference. I don't know.
I have one more comment and a question. The comment is that I'm still thinking about what you mentioned about the dimension of selectivism, which is somehow omitted in the analysis, because the distinction here is about egalitarianism and universalism, while the Esping-Anderson's universalism, selectivism distinction is left aside, but there might be an option to measure targeting of the benefits, to implement a measure of targeting to the specific groups of population, for example, to those who are poor or something like that, and such approach could possibly to put this dimension into analysis. Then there might be 3 dimensions, in fact, because the recipiency rates, as you use them, it's not about targeting, it's only about how broad is the group of the recipients, but not how the recipients are needy. That's it. That's the point. So, but that's just consideration. And another question is whether you have attempted to link this analysis of policy effort, because in fact you are analyzing policy effort, how the benefits are distributed and what conditions, what groups, to link this analysis to policy outcomes. It means, for example, how well the different welfare states alleviate poverty and similar. So, although possibly with respect to the specific groups like lone mothers or unemployed, etc. So,
yes. Outcomes, Thomas, and organization outputs, no. Organization outputs is dimension of quality.
Yeah. But
effectiveness.
How would you bring that into this story?
Yes.
How would you do that? I mean, in your case, your targeting and your outcome comments are more or less the same. Where you say that for this is for the total population, a range of benefits. But what do welfare states do for specific groups? How focused are they targeting on, for instance, single parents?
For example.
Or widows.
Or low income.
Long-term, whatever. Yeah. So you can single out these groups from the data and then see what they do receive. So that is possible. In terms of outcomes, you can take, I took the median income of the population as a standard reference for the amount of benefit, but I could also have taken the poverty level, minimum income level, and then see how these states do with regard to lifting people above that level.
Because obviously when you showed your Scandinavian cluster, these are the countries with low levels of poverty rates.
Yeah.
On the other hand, Czech Republic also enjoys a relative low poverty rate, although located in the middle group, which is due to the other characteristics of the welfare system. So,
shall we call it a day then?
Good. No questions then?
No questions.
Okay, then thank you very much.
It was a pleasure.